Hello everyone and welcome. I'm Derek Elliott from Dirk.com, and today we're going to design, model, and render a 3D pair of glasses in Blender like the one you see here. Today's video is brought to you by the kind folks at Squarespace. We'll be touching more on that in a little bit. I've wanted to do a glasses modeling, lighting, and animation tutorial for a while now, so when Render Weekly announced their latest 3-week challenge to design and render a pair of sunglasses, I took it as a sign to get working on that video. So to get to this point here, we're going to model the frames, add materials, lighting, and then a touch of animation. It's all pretty simple, but what's not simple is coming up with a darn glasses design. I started sketching some frames and quickly realized it's basically impossible to draw symmetrical designs, and since I couldn't use my trusty mirror modifier in my pen and paper sketchbook, I decided I would continue my explorations in the one and only, our love, Blender. Now hold on there, you eager little blenderer. Let's take a short break to speak with John Mauriello, who has designed a whole bunch of glasses in real life for actual companies, to see what he can share about designing a quality pair of specs. Hey John, how's it going today?
It is going great.
Wow, that sounds fantastic. So we're here today to talk about sunglasses, right?
That's exactly right. And I've had a lot of experience designing sunglasses and eyewear, or pretty much anything that fits on the face.
Can you tell us a little bit about maybe what sort of considerations we should be making when we're designing our sunglasses?
So there are a couple mistakes that I see in eyewear designs from beginners, and they're pretty easy to fix. Understanding the anatomy of an eyewear frame is really important if you want to design a functional frame. But even if you're just doing more conceptual work, understanding those constraints is just going to make your concept a lot more believable, even just as a rendering.
And what would you say some of those hot tips?
All right, so some hot tips.
Put your sunglasses on for these hot tips, folks. They are going to be hot.
These tips are so hot.
That is hot.
It's hot in here. Eyewear design is really all about the lenses. For the sake of simplicity, we're going to say that all lenses are actually cut from a sphere. So you start with a sphere and then you cut the lens shape from that. For the sake of modeling, really your eyewear frame should match the contours of that sphere.
So I know from the top view, sometimes you see a little bit of a curve with the design. So what that is essentially a section of that sphere that's driven by the lens shape.
That's exactly right.
A lot of times on sunglasses in particular, it seems like sometimes they're like perfectly flat. Is that the case?
Yes, that is a much more like a recent trendy thing that's been happening. It's a look. It's totally valid as a look.
Is there a way that the lens should be seated in relation to the pupil?
Yes, there is. So the apex of that sphere, like the highest point, should be generally in the center of the lens. With sunglasses, you want the edge of this frame to generally be near the edge of your face. With eyeglasses, where you can actually see the person's eye, you want the eye to be generally in the center of the lens, a good guideline from a styling perspective.
So now we've talked a lot about the lenses themselves, but you brought up another interesting point, which is how far out those frames should come. That's another question I had, is about the earpieces. Should they go straight back to your ear? When the frames are off your face, should they be straight back, but then when you put them on, they'll flex out a little bit?
So they should be straight back like this. And then when you put them on, they should sort of cant out a little bit, maybe like that. There should be kind of something there.
Now, what about the tilt in the profile view? Should they be horizontal?
Oh, you caught the pantoscopic tilt. Say that five times fast. Yeah, the pantoscopic tilt. So the pantoscopic tilt is really important. That is when you look at glasses from the side, they actually are sort of tilting towards the face a little bit. You can have retroscopic tilt, which is the opposite. But generally speaking, you want to have about 5 up to 12 degrees of pantoscopic tilt.
Should it be just a pure tilt in, or can it be sort of like a curve?
It will be, it actually will be a curve, just because of the way that the lens is cut. The sphere that you're cutting out is also a curve.
I know one thing that you mentioned to me before we started talking was that you should design your frames in the context of a head. One thing I noticed when I was designing is that, many of the shapes that I thought looked about right were kind of thrown off once I actually put it on a head.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it has to do with these things that we're discussing right now. And even if you're just doing conceptual work that's never going to be worn by a person, like it's just for a rendering, understanding these constraints is going to make your concept a lot more believable. There's also this thing called refractive index. Different lenses have different refractive indexes, which is important for rendering purposes. Anything between 1.5 and 1.74 is probably good.
So when you said the refractive index, that's like the index of refraction on that glass material, you're saying would be between
1.5 and 1.74.
Okay. So very, very refractive compared to something like normal glass or plastic.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one other thing that's like good to think about, Derek, is how this thing is going to fit on the face. I almost hesitate to give these guidelines out just because it can kind of constrain you and limit you in maybe not the best way. So maybe don't put it in, but I'm going to tell you anyway. The way to think about a pair of eyewear frames is that this is basically replacing a large part of my face. You don't quite see my eyebrows as well. And now this is now what my new eyebrow looks like. This side piece right here is sort of accentuating my jawline a little bit more because it's pretty square. It has a little bit more depth. This frame is a little bit deeper in this dimension. So it actually makes my face seem a little bit less long. So all of these things are things that you want to think about when you're designing a frame. What kind of person would wear this? Like, what do they look like? And how can I accentuate their best features and downplay maybe the ones that are not as flattering? Now, I hesitate to give that advice because standards of beauty are pretty subjective. Also, if you design a frame through those constraints, you're gonna end up with something that's kind of expected. You know, there are only so many things that are going to look good on a face. Keep it in mind in the back of your head. But if you want to design something unique and crazy, maybe just forget about that entirely.
No, it's really good to have an understanding of those constraints. And I think that's one thing that is really cool about eyewear, and a similar reason why I like furniture so much is that it interfaces with the human body. So there are definite constraints, but beyond that, it's basically sculpture, it's art. It's an opportunity to work within those constraints, but interpret them in your own way. Well, thanks, John, for all those tips. If you, dear viewer, want to learn more about the principles of great industrial design, check out John on YouTube. His channel is Design Theory. I'll have a link for that in the description. So if you're feeling inspired, let's hop into Blender and start on some initial designs. Now, doing my iterations in Blender also meant that I could add in my trusty, accurately scaled head model to get a sense of proportion and see what these would actually look like on a face. This head model is included in the final result file to the folks who are members of my Patreon, link in the description. To get started with some Blender sketching, first I added a plane in the center of my scene right at the top of the nose, and then so that my origin stayed in place, I entered edit mode, then moved my plane to the side and added a mirror modifier. I created this rough base geometry in order to have a nice clean edge loop running around the outside and inside, and with that together, a subdivision surface modifier smooths things out so you can really start playing with the shapes. It's really cool how even just the slightest adjustments can really add a sense of character and emotion to the design. As the general form started to take shape, I used things like the Solidify Modifier to give the frame some thickness, the Bevel Modifier to control my edges, and the Skin Modifier to create wires and frames. Since actually designing the glasses was by far the most time-consuming part and what you should probably also spend your time on, feel free to pause the video here and get your design close to what you want. And now, in an effort to make my tutorial not drag on into infinity where I slowly adjust things as we go, I have prepared a silhouette of my final design, and that's what I'm going to add in here as a reference image in the background, and I'll use that as an underlay when we start the modeling process. So with that reference image in place, let's go ahead and start modeling this. Slow down the pace a little bit, and I'll walk you through all the steps to build out this frame design. So let's just imagine for a second that by the end of this video, you're such a beast at designing and rendering glasses that you decide to start manufacturing your designs and selling them. Well, there's a good website called Squarespace that would be a great place for getting started with that process. Squarespace makes it super freaking easy to build a website from the ground up using gorgeous templates for a variety of common uses, especially something like e-commerce or even just for a portfolio site to host those beautiful renders of yours. Head on over to squarespace.com/Dirk to get started with 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Link in description. All right, so in a pretty basic default Blender scene here, we've got all our normal stuff it comes with. I'm gonna press A to select everything, X to delete it, and I'm gonna go ahead and bring in my head model. So I'm gonna go up here to File, Append, and then I've got that in a separate folder here. So I'm gonna go into my practice file and then go into my object and then navigate to where I have my head with eyes right there. So with that in the scene, that is scaled accurately, but I want to change the units in my scene up a little bit just so that everything works nicely and we're all to scale. So in the unit section, I'm going to change this to imperial. I'll have the length be in inches, and I will also change my grid scale to 0.1 just so that our grid matches a little bit more nicely. So now this head model, the way I have the origin set up is so that the bridge of the eyeglasses should be right about where that origin is. Now just to check the scale real quick, I'm going to add in a cube and then tab into edit mode and then turn on my edge length overlay to see that that is 2.4 inches wide. Now your glasses will probably end up being about 5.5 or 6 inches wide if you're working in imperial units. So I can see that everything is roughly to scale there. So I'll delete that object. So now just to show you that step one more time, I'm going to add in my reference images. So I'm going to go image and I'm going to do reference, and then I will navigate to where I have that saved right here, silhouette. And that will come in nice and large at the angle we were looking at. I'm going to press Alt-R to reset the rotation, and then RX90 to rotate on the X-axis. And then I'm just going to scale that down until it is roughly the right size. And we'll just move this down a tad so that it's sitting in the right place. I think that looks about right. Now you could create a reference image like this in something like Adobe Illustrator or Photoshop, or you could of course just take a pencil sketch that you have. But what I did was basically take my final design and then just render it with a black material as a transparent PNG. So I want to lock this object so that I don't accidentally move it. So I'm going to turn on my selection restriction toggle and uncheck that so that I can no longer select it. But here in the empty option, I do actually want to go ahead and turn on some opacity and bring that down quite a bit just so that it's enough to see what's going on, but it's not going to really interfere with us too much. I think I'll also turn off the selection for the head. So I'm going to press Shift C to make sure my cursor is nicely in the center of my scene. And what I'll do next is just go ahead and press Shift A, add a mesh, plane, and then tabbing into edit mode, I'm going to RX90 to rotate that on the X-axis and then just move it over. Now it's important we do this again in edit mode so that our origin stays in the center there. So now what I can do is go ahead and add in my mirror modifier, which will of course mirror it to the other side. And again, this is about the origin point. And now I can start shaping out these glasses. So the first thing I think I'll do is just select that plane, press I to inset it, and then I'll delete that face, and then I'm going to press Ctrl R to add an edge loop, and then I'll actually delete this face as well. And then in my edge select mode, by pressing 2, I'm going to just start to shape this out a little bit more. Now I want to make sure I have enough edge loops here so that again we can have that nice form where we've got the edge loop going around the outside. So I'm going to press EX, and then I want this to run into itself. So on the mirror modifier options, I want to check clipping. So let's pull that all in so that it's nice like that. And then let's connect these two edges. So selecting these 4 vertices and pressing F to make a face. So now we have a very blocky pair of glasses. That might be all you're going for, but I want to add in my subdivision surface modifier next to start to smooth things out. And now we sort of have this cool mask shape. Now on this subdivision modifier, you can probably crank the levels up to something like a 4 so that it's very smooth. We want to work with as few vertices as possible here so that we can create nice round forms and not have too much stuff to mess with. So I'm just going to start shaping this out, just grabbing these vertices until they end up in the right place. Now I'll have to remember exactly how many edge loops I added. So Control R again is going to be the hotkey to add an edge loop. So I'm just going to do pretty standard selection methods here and just start pulling this all into place, just grabbing vertices, moving them. You can press Alt-Z to go into your X-ray view if you've got an underlay you want to see better. And then I'm just gonna move things around steadily but surely. So again, you may have your own design here, but of course I'm going to follow what I had set out to create from the get-go. I think I need to add in another edge loop here, scale that down. Maybe another edge loop right there. If you've ever worked with something like the pen tool in Adobe Illustrator, you're sort of familiar with this process where these are acting kind of as control points for our curve. The think we might need one more edge loop right there just to get that shape nice and tight. And I'm actually going to turn off my edge length preview there. So again, you can totally design your glasses this way, but in my case, I'm just going to be showing you the process. Of course, you can do it based off of just what's feeling right at the time as you're going through it. But since I did spend some time getting the shape to something I liked, I want to go ahead and use that. Now maybe we add in one more edge loop right there just to help tighten this up a little bit more. Now to add that little detail over here, I'm going to select this edge and then just press E to extrude it out, rotate it maybe a little bit, and then scale it down, which now I can see that this needs to come down a little bit. And maybe we'll actually need another edge loop here as well. Just add edge loops as needed to give you the control you need over these curves. And no matter what style of glasses you're designing, this is going to be a pretty similar process. Now some of these areas where it's not quite as sharp as we want it to be, that'll be something that we can make adjustments to with the Bevel Modifier. So we're going to be adding basically some control loops with that modifier so that we don't have to add too much additional geometry into the glasses themselves. So this is feeling pretty good. I've got the rough shape there. Now what I want to do is go ahead and add some thickness to it. So I'm going to do that with a Solidify Modifier. Now again, totally up to your preference, but I'm going to bring this down quite a bit so that we've got a nice thin frame there. Now, if you remember what John was saying, there is a little bit of a curve to the top of the frames here. It can get really difficult to work on your profile, though, if you're also trying to manage the curve of that. So I'm going to do that a little bit of an easier way by using a simple Deform modifier. So let's go ahead and add a modifier, and let's make that a simple Deform. Now, by default, the simple Deform is going to be set to Twist, but we can change it here to Bend, and then we'll have it bend in the Z axis so that that starts to kind of follow the shape of our face a little bit. So in the top view here, we can adjust that to whatever we like. I think I'll leave it something like that. Now this might not line up quite exactly anymore with my reference image, but I think it's pretty close. So I think we can leave it at that for now. Now I think I will go ahead and disable this empty here, which is our reference image, so that that's not in the way anymore. And since we're going to start working with the shape of this a little bit more, I'm going to turn on the cavity option here, just to be able to see those edges a little bit more clearly. So this is looking pretty nice, but the next thing I want to do is do a little bit of sculpting on this so that we can get the nose pads in there, and we can also add in some bevel modifiers to control those edges. And to do that, we're going to need to apply the Solidify modifier. But before I do that, what I want to do is create a duplicate of this in case we need to come back to it. So I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate it and then move it to a new collection with M, new collection, and we'll call that the trash collection so that we can disable that. And if we need to come back to it, of course, it'll be right there. So now usually when you're applying modifiers, you want to apply them in order because that's how they appear in your viewport. But what I want to do is just apply this Solidify modifier, and that will create some issues for us. First of all, if you remember from the shoe tutorial, that'll add some faces in here that we no longer need. So let's press X to delete those. And by the way, I didn't mention it, but if it's easier for you to, instead of using hotkeys, you can turn on this move gizmo, and that's an easy way to make adjustments with those arrows that appear there. So the form now is looking nice, but I do, like I said, want to add in some details to keep this a little bit sharper around the edge. So I'm going to add in my bevel modifier at the end of all of this. Now it will appear at the bottom, but I actually want this bevel to be above the subdivision because we're going to be basically using the bevel to add edge loops, which will tighten some of those edges that are being smoothed out with the subdivision surface modifier right now. So I'm going to drag that up to the top here. And now the bevel by default is working on an angle limit method, but I want to define where exactly the bevel is appearing. So I'm going to change this to weight. And now what Blender is going to do is look for weight markings on the model where it should apply the bevel. And by default, there won't be any. So I'm going to press N to bring up my sidebar here. And then in edit mode, I can now start to select edges and define what I want to be sharp. So pressing 2 to go into my edge select mode. Those are also up here, by the way, vertex, edge, and face select mode. I'm going to select the inner edge here by Alt and left clicking on it. And then I'm going to take this bevel weight and drag it up to 1. Now what that'll do is give it 100% of this bevel value. Now a lot of times people have problems, they'll think the bevel modifier just isn't working, but by default, the bevel modifier will turn on a clamp overlap, which will prevent things like this from happening. So basically this value is set to 3 inches now, which is way too big for that bevel. So we're going to drag that down quite a bit. The clamp basically keeps it from going too big so that you get those intersecting issues. So I'm going to bring this value down pretty low. You can see now better what the bevel is doing. It's kind of adding a single edge loop around that corner to help sharpen it a little bit. So dragging this to a very low value, you can click in here and drag left and right. And to do a more fine-tuned drag, you can hold shift while you're doing that. And if you find that it's not sharp enough, you can add in another segment, but I think I'll leave it at 1. I still want it to be relatively rounded. So the next place I want to add in some bevel is going to be around the outside of the frame here. So let's do the same thing we did before. Alt and left click will select an edge ring. Now this isn't going to get all the way around the outside, so I'm going to need to manually select a few different pieces here so that we can get the bevel all the way around the outside. Now with all those selected, I can drag the bevel weight up to 1, and that will flatten that out just the way we want. Now it's nice and round on the inside, and we've got kind of that sharp defined shape on the outside. And you could of course also add in your bevel to areas like this to keep things nice and sharp. So let's drag the bevel weight on there up to 1. And now that's looking a little bit more like our silhouette was. Now to go in and add in the nose pads, what I'm going to do is basically just select an area here where I want my nose pad to be. And I think this will actually probably need to come down a little bit, which we might need to turn back our reference image. But I'm going to press G twice to edge slide this down. That's just going to bring that down along the shape that it's already on. And then I'm going to select this face here and then just press E and Y to bring it back a little bit. And that'll kind of create that nose pad shape for us. So now you can fit this as much as you like to your head model if you're using one, or just go based off your own emotions and see how it feels, see how it fits to you. So feel free to sculpt this, rotate it a little bit until it's kind of nicely pressed up against your nose there. Of course, you could look inside the head at the scary nostrils and eyeballs and see if it's intersecting. But I think that that's looking pretty good for me. But I think what I actually want to do now is pull the bottom of the frame a little bit closer to the face. That's another thing John had mentioned, is something that you see in real glasses. So you can see right now it's completely vertical, but I want to kind of rotate a little bit. But instead of rotating it, I'm going to actually just go into the object here and then select all these bottom vertices, and just kind of pull those in until I've got a nice shape. Now this isn't necessarily super accurate, but for what we're doing, I think it's going to work just fine. And I think that that's fitting nicely onto our face. So now since we did mess with our edge loops a little bit there, I'm going to turn back on my reference image and just make a couple little adjustments so that we've got things still aligned with my design intent. I can bring this back down a little bit, something like that. And I think that looks pretty good. So let's turn that back off. Now might also be a good time to go in and make some small adjustments to the bridge of the nose, like right here, for example, to kind of pull that out. And maybe you're thinking this bevel is just a little bit too tight, so maybe we bump the size of that up just a little bit. That's looking good. So we've still got some control, but it's a little bit more rounded, less sharp as it was before. So now if you want it to be super accurate, you could do what John was saying and add in a large sphere and then maybe cut out the exact lens shape from that, which apparently would be a little bit more realistic. But the method I'm going to do is definitely a little bit more visual and it's going to be a little bit simpler, I think. So I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate this object, and then I'm going to press F2 and rename that lenses. That'll be the next thing we create. And we can probably go ahead and select the other plane, press F2 and rename it to frame. So with our lenses object selected, I'm going to tab into edit mode, and then basically what I want to do is just create a ring around the inside of where that frame is. So I'm going to press Ctrl R to add an edge ring, and then click, and then right click. And then with that still selected, I'm going to press Ctrl I to select the inverse, which would be everything else. Press X and delete those vertices. So now what I have is just this perfect ring around the inside. And what I can do is fill that in with a grid fill command. So I'm going to press A to select everything, and then you can press F3 to search for it, or I think up here in face, you can do grid fill. And that's going to nicely fill it with a grid, which is going to be pretty much flat. Of course, we've got the simple deform adjusting the shape a little bit for us. And sometimes you will need to adjust the simple deform. This can be sort of based off the size of the object. So sometimes you need to adjust the angle a little bit to get it to pull in or out to sit nicely in your frame, but I think it's working pretty good how it is there. Maybe we pop it out just a little bit, something like that I think is looking nice. So this is looking good. If you wanted to, you could, pull these out a little bit just to give your frame a little bit more of a spherical look. Something like that is going to be really nice when it comes to the reflections, but you can just sort of adjust this geometry very slightly. You don't want to throw your shape off too much, but maybe we select this whole face here and just pull that out just a very slight amount so that we've got kind of a little bit of a curvature, sort of faking that sphere look. So that's looking pretty good, and of course you could go in and adjust that more once you get into the lighting if your reflections are looking a little bit funny, but that's going to be the Dirk fast and dirty process for adding lenses to the frames. Now when we do get to rendering this, it's not going to look good if it's just a single plane like it is now, or sorry, like a 0 thickness plane. So I want to go in and add in a Solidify modifier. So let's add that at the very end, Solidify. And if you're anything like me, that's probably about what your prescription lenses look like. But I'm gonna change the offset on this to 0 so that it's going out from the center, and then I'll drop the thickness down quite a bit just so that we do have some thickness, but that it's basically inside the frame there. So I think that that's looking pretty good. So this is sort of a good middle point where I want to sort of create a save state for myself. So I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate this and move it into the trash collection so that we have that if we need to go back to it. Because what I want to do now is start working on the bridges, the earpieces here. So let's actually leave the simple deform on that object. But what I'm going to do is press Shift D to duplicate this one, tab into edit mode, and then we're just going to select this little edge area here to create the piece that will become our eye bridges, earpieces, whatever they're called. So same thing, Control I to select the inverse and delete those faces. So now I have this little piece here. Let's just delete the simple deform. How about that? And then we'll just move it into place manually. So bringing that back to somewhere like that. So I think I want to do just a little bit of shaping over here to set myself up for success. So I'm going to move maybe this piece out a little bit so we've got a little bit more thickness there. And then in my top view, I kind of want that to be going straight ahead. So let's maybe move that a tad out. Now, because we still have the simple deform on, that's going to be a little bit of an odd angle. But you can see when we pull it out here, we'll sort of get it to be straight over here where we want it. So now tabbing out of edit mode on that, and then into edit mode on this, I can move this into place. And then so that we've got a little bit of a nicer joint here, I think I probably should go ahead and add in the bevel to right here. So let's add in the bevel weight to 1. Okay, that's looking good. And now maybe we want to flatten this all out a little bit. Let's do let's first do SY0 to flatten that out. Check it in the top view, and then yeah, just kind of bring this out. And again, this is very eyeballed here, but let's sort of bring that back a tad so that it gets a little closer to flat. You of course could apply the simple deform, but I think it's going to be easier just to leave it on for now. So now we've got a nice thick area that's nice and flat where we can attach the rest of our glasses frame. And maybe we want a bevel right here too, so that that is looking a little bit cleaner. Okay, now for this, let's go ahead and I think I want to go ahead and just remove all the bevel for now, but let's connect these two faces. Select this one and that one, F to fill it in. And then I'm going to go ahead and select these faces and just pull this whole thing out a little bit. So I'm just going to go over here. And now this part of the design I did not create a silhouette for, so we're going to eyeball it a little bit. But I think I want to, let's extrude this out on the y-axis a little bit. So E is going to be your hotkey there. SZ to bring it down. And then E and Y to bring it back out. I'm just going to create sort of a nice thin area where our metal piece can eventually attach to. Now let's go ahead and add back in our bevel modifier, our bevel weight, so that we have nice clean edges here. So let's, in edge select mode, let's turn the bevel weight on these up. Obviously we want it around here too, so that that syncs up nicely. Bevel weight up, and then let's do it on the bottom, bevel weight, and we'll do it right here too. So that is looking pretty good. Of course, adjust the proportions as you might like to. Now this is where it gets a little bit weird, because like John was saying, the glasses go straight back, but when they actually end up on your head, it'll bend out a little bit just so that they stay on your face. But we're going to just kind of model it straight back, and then if we get to rendering it on a head or something like that, you could flare it out a little bit. But I think this is looking decent. One thing I do want to do though is just straighten up this side. So I'm going to box select all this and then SX0, which will flatten that out. And then I'm gonna do the same thing over here, SX0. So that is looking a little bit better. Now maybe for this one, we add in another segment. Should we try that? Nah. So that's gonna make it quite a bit tighter. Let's see, I guess we could do the same over here and that would line it up. That doesn't look so bad. Maybe we add in a little bit of depth back. Something like that looks good. Now I could Control C to copy that value. And then I think I could paste it right here. Yep, looks like that worked so that those have the same bevel value. Now this is looking pretty good. I think there's a couple more places where we need to add in our bevel weight. Let's put it right there, and then let's also put it right here and here and here, bevel weight up to 1 so that that's all nice and tidy. And yeah, that'll be the start of our earpieces. But what I want to do now is add in the wire part that goes through here, and then also that wire part that I had going along the top. You can of course skip that if you're doing more of like a Ray-Ban style that doesn't have that, but I just wanted to show that because I thought it looked pretty cool. And I think there's a lot of people who do want to do more wireframe type designs and they might need to do a similar technique. So I'm going to do same thing I did to start this off. I'm going to just press Shift A to add in a plane, tab into edit mode, bring it over, and then I'm going to use this object SY to make it a little bit thinner. And let's actually add in our mirror modifier again, turn on our clipping options so that we can run these together. And then I'm going to add in a subdivision surface modifier. And so that it doesn't round the edges here like that, I can go into our advanced options and then boundary smooth. I can do keep corners, and that'll allow me to adjust this curve and have that be subdivided without rounding the edges. So maybe we just do like 3 subdivisions there. Now for this, of course, we'll also want to add in a solidify modifier to give that just a little bit of thickness. So let's bring that down a little bit, and then so that it's not perfectly sharp on the corner, I can add in a bevel modifier, and I'll leave the angle limit method on like it is there, and I'll just bring this whole thing way back until we've got just a slight bevel. Now I can use again the simple deform modifier here to match that curve, so let's add that in, simple deform. And then same thing we did before, let's change that to bend on the Z axis, and we will go into our top view and just adjust that so that it's looking about right. Something like that. And maybe this whole thing comes back just a teeny tad. I think that's looking pretty good. And then I'll just move it into place. Now I could turn back on my reference image here to see where I had that, but basically just kind of following the form there. I think it gives it a nice little detail. So let's just move that up, and then we're going to need to add in at least 1 edge loop here. So let's just move that kind of over, move this one down a little bit, and then maybe just extrude this so we get a nice curve there. Now I want this to sort of be somewhat submerged into the acetate or plastic frame there. So just going to push that down into it a little bit until that's looking about how I want it. And that looks about how I want it. Let's turn off our reference image there. And yeah, that's looking pretty good. Now if you wanted to follow this a little bit more closely, you could of course pull this back a tad, and maybe this whole thing comes back just a teeny tad here. These are the adjustments I was talking about. If I was designing these from scratch, we'd be here for days. We'll probably still be here for an hour, but we'll see. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Now I'm going to do a similar setup to add in the frame over here. So let's just press Shift D to duplicate this. Let's name that to earpiece wire. And then I'm going to tab into edit mode, select the inverse, delete those faces, and then let's just move this into place so that we can start working with that. So I'm gonna sort of flatten this out here. Let's do SX0. And then for this one, I'll get rid of this simple deform so that we just have that right where we want it there. Now, because we're gonna be doing these as like a sort of a clear frame, what I wanna do is show that wire piece actually attaching to what'll ultimately be like a hinge right there. So let's just pull this all the way out straight. Looks like we lined up pretty nicely with our ear there. And then we can, let's actually just leave that for now. So that'll be a metal piece. And by the way, if it's easier while you're working, you can actually go ahead and start adding some materials. So I won't actually set them up quite yet, but I'll call that horn because that'll be our sort of horn design material. I'll name this one metal, and then you can, in the viewport display, you can actually change, you can make it metallic, for example, and you could change the color to something a little different just so it was easier to see it. You can make it shiny if you want to. But let's add the metal material to this one as well. Just helps when you're designing your frames to be able to see a little bit better the different parts and pieces. You know, we could add a lens material here, and we could make that transparent. So in the viewport display, again, this is just what's going to be displayed in the viewport. not what you're going to see in the actual render. We'll get to that after. And you can actually turn the alpha down here too. So you got sort of a nice little viewport setup where it's a little bit easier to see closer to what your final design might end up looking like. For the horn material, I might just leave it white, or maybe we'll just add a tinge of color to it just to get a little bit more excited about our design. Now let's look at the horn material as well. I guess this kind of can be helpful when you're modeling, because then you won't accidentally forget a piece later if you make something really small and you do your final animation render and realize something didn't have a material on it. But this is all coming together quite nicely. We have a pretty good looking pair of glasses. We can maybe we go ahead and parent some things. So let's select all these objects and the lenses, and I'm going to parent it to the main frame here. So Control P to object, keep transform. So now we can just, pull this off, see what that's looking like, and then I could just press Alt G to reset that back to the location it was in the origin of our scene. So I am liking the way that looks now. For the hinges, I do want to add them in because it's a nice little detail, again, especially with the transparent material we're going to be doing. But I'm not going to get too advanced. Of course, you could get into some nice modeling of some real hinges and stuff, but I think what I want to do is just do a very simplified hinge, and that's going to be by using sort of just some basic shapes here. So I'm going to duplicate this object. So Shift D to duplicate it. I'm just going to bring it up a little bit, and then I'm going to press RY90 to flatten that out. And then let's SY to bring it in. And that still has the metal material, which is nice. But for the hinge, I want them to be sort of rounded. So so we've got the mirror modifier, which we want. Subdivision, I think for this piece, I'm going to get rid of, which makes me think I could probably, no, we'll leave it on that one for now. Oh, and these need to be separate objects. So I'm going to press P and separate that by selection. So we've got our mirror, solidify, bevel. We like all that. I'm going to add in another bevel, and that'll actually go at the very top, well, maybe right under the mirror. And I'm going to select vertices here, and that's going to bevel those vertices, as you might assume. So let's bring that down a little bit just until we can see it get a little bit smaller. And then I'll add a few segments just so we have kind of a nice rounded design. Now, if you run that into itself, it's going to cancel out the other bevel modifier. So I'm just going to pull that till it's pretty close. So this little piece, I'll go ahead and move into place. That's going to be, I think it'll be sort of a nice little detail that pokes through on the front of our glasses. So let's just pop that out just a little bit and then move that back there. And then in my front view, maybe we make this a little bit thicker. And let's change this solidify offset to be 0 so that it's happening in the middle there. So let's just make that tad thicker, something like that. And of course we could shade that smooth and turn on our auto smooth option. That's looking pretty cool. Let's go into our front view, and then this is going to be basically the pieces of our hinge. So I'm going to do Shift D and duplicate that down. So let's do that once just so it's perfectly aligned, and that'll be the part that actually connects it to the earpiece. And then let's do that one more time and bring that down, and that'll be another piece that pokes out the front. Sort of a nice little detail, I think. But for this one, let's slide it back. And then in our top view, we'll kind of assume that we want sort of a circle right there, which would be the joint. So that should be, let's see, that should go, because that piece needs to go about right there. And then the other pieces of our hinge, let's make sure we get them both selected. Those would come out to right there. And then that will be the actual pivot point of our object. So we may end up having some intersection issues there, but of course, if we do end up folding the glasses, we can fix that after the fact. But I think that looks pretty nice for our little hinge object. And we've got a nice little detail on the front now. Now, you can't see it very well here, but of course, once we get to making this material transparent, that'll be a nice little detail. And of course, we've also got the wire running through the end there. So things are in pretty good shape here. I think the last thing I want to do is just go ahead and with this same object, I want to basically create a little bit of a pad for the backside. So let's Shift D to duplicate this and just move that back. And I'm just going to do, let's see, maybe place it right around there. And maybe we actually use let's use this piece so that we match that thickness. So let's do a Shift D, Y, bring that back, and then E to extrude it. And then I'm just going to Control and right click, and that will extrude it to the location of my cursor and just create a little bit of a detail there. Now let's go ahead and readjust our bevel weights here. So I'm just going to turn that all off and then add them back in manually. So I want this edge, this edge, this edge, and actually maybe we don't want the bottom edges. Maybe those should be rounded for comfort. So let's turn in the bevel weight there. And then I do want it on the outside edge here. Oh, we missed one edge there, bevel weight. Thought that was looking a little funky. So this is looking cool. Maybe we hide our head just for a second so we can see what's going on here. So that's looking like a decent shape. You know, maybe we pull this out just for a little bit of thickness there. Again, do it however you want, but I think that's looking pretty good to me. Got a little bit of an issue with our thing poking through here, so let's go ahead and pull this back. And then I think I want that to follow. So how did we have this set up? This is just a plane right now. So let's, I think that's fine. We can leave it. Let's do the control click to extrude again. And I think this has a subdivision surface on it. No, it does not. So I need to add that back in so that we can get that curve. So let's add in a subdivision surface modifier. Let's put that at the top right underneath the mirror, I think. And then let's do our keep corners option so that our corners are nice. And we might need to add in one sort of controlling loop here so that that stays straight until it gets to that point right there. And then let's just position this so that it's lining up with our little piece we created there. Now I'm just going to scale this down so it kind of goes to a point. Looked at a fair amount of glasses in the past few days and they all kind of have that. So I'm adding it, and we might want to add in just a little bit more subdivision there. Now I'm sure you all know, but the viewport levels versus the render view levels, this is going to be what you see in the viewport. This is what you see in the render. If your computer is slowing down a little bit, sometimes you want to have the viewport levels lower than the render levels so that you have a nice and snappy viewport, but I usually like to keep those the same if I can. So now in the top view, let's just make sure everything's all nicely aligned, and maybe this whole piece just comes over a little bit to be centered up nicely. So I might do a few more touch-ups here, but I think we're in pretty good shape. We've got our glasses model, and it's looking nice on our fella here. Hopefully yours is looking nice as well. But I think in the next part, we're going to go ahead and add some materials, do some lighting, and if we've got time, maybe a little bit of animation as well. So thanks for being here so far. Looking forward to seeing what everyone's coming up with. And yeah, I'll see you in the next part. All right, so we're back in the place we left off with the modeling. I've made some very, very slight adjustments here. Not much, but I did realize in the process that my hinge would not actually work the way I had it designed, but I'm not going to worry about messing with it. I might do something with it later. Probably won't. We're going to leave that for you as what I like to call homework. So yeah, you can worry about your hinges. I'll worry about mine, even if they don't work. But let's go ahead and get started with some materials. Now, if you know anything about materials, you need a lighting setup, just a little bit of lighting so that you can kind of see what's going on. Because, you know, if we just switch into our default world here, gray and depressing, it's not going to look so good. So first thing I'm going to do is add in a sky texture. Now, this is something that only works in cycles as of now. So if you're an EV, you might want to use an HDRI or something like that, or just set up some lights, which we are also going to add some lights. Now for this world, I'm going to turn the strength down a little bit so it's not quite so bright. And then maybe I'll also increase the size of the sun a little bit so that we get a little softer shadow on the back there. But I think that looks pretty good. Now I want to set up my viewport a little bit so that we can have a shader editor up here where of course we'll be building the materials. And then at least now for just a second while I'm setting up the lighting, I want to, let's turn off the overlays there. I want to have a viewport over here where I can see my lights, and then over here I'm just going to see what they look like, because this is the rendered view. And once again, I am rendering in cycles. I think cycles is going to look quite a bit better for especially these transparent materials. So let's add in just a few more lights so that when we're working with these materials, we get a good sense of how they're actually looking and might behave in different environments. So I'm going to add in Shift A, light, and I'll just do an area light. Now for the first one, we'll just kind of bring this up and scale it up a tad, bring it back a little bit, and then we can just basically duplicate that light again. So a lot of times I like to put sort of a larger light kind of just back here, sort of there's photographers that know all these terms and stuff, but this is the large light that goes in the back. And then we'll do one more light, which sometimes I like to put kind of like, I don't know, like over here or something. Maybe that's a little bit smaller. Something like that I think is good. Now you might need to adjust the strength of those lights depending on the scale of your scene and everything. But mine is just all set up like it was before in the modeling section, where, you know, my unit scale, for some reason my unit scale is back to 1, but not going to worry about that. So we're just going to go ahead and start building out these materials. just because it's the most obviously wrong thing. I think I want to build out this lens material first. Now, if you remember from towards the end of the modeling section, we did actually add materials to a few of these objects. So they do already have some materials. And I think right now I can go ahead and move this over. No, should we leave that? So we can see what we're selecting. That might be actually convenient. Let's bring that back, but we'll leave it small. And then we'll just have this be a nice big fat rendered view where we're working on the materials. So for the lens material, let's go ahead and select that one. Oh, now I need to turn my overlays back on over here. So with the lens material selected, I want to, for one, make it transparent. And if you are anything like me and you've been wearing a mask for quite a bit of the last 2 years, that's what your glasses probably look like for the most part. Very foggy, very unfortunate. Looks kind of cool, but not very practical. And that is looking foggy because its roughness is too high. So let's go ahead and turn this all the way down to 0 so that they are nice and shiny. Now it's a little bit gray here. If you wanted to do, again, we're doing sunglasses here. So you're probably gonna want to turn this value down a little bit. But if you wanted it to be super clear, this starts off by default at 0.8, so you probably would want to turn that up a tad to full on 1 so they're nice and transparent. But I think that's looking not right, so I want to add some color to it. So let's just do something like that for now. I'll show you how we can add a little gradient into there in a minute. But transmission at 1, you could also, if you want to give these kind of like a cool like UV coating or something, you could actually start to add in like a little bit of metallic value there. That could be a cool look. Again, do what you want here, but I'm going to leave that off. You could also add in some clear coat and give that just like a slightly different roughness to give it a little dimension. The clear coat basically gives you like almost like a second roughness value to play with. I will leave that on. I think it's kind of interesting. But that looks good. Again, sunglasses, do whatever color you want. To keep them pretty bright and transparent, you would want this value to be really high. And of course, we would want to turn it down a little bit if we were going for more of a shaded sunglasses look. But let's go ahead and add in a little bit of a gradient so that those lenses look a little bit cooler. So I'm going to add in a texture, and that'll be a gradient texture. And I'll plug that into the color factor here. So if you have ever followed a tutorial with me before, you know that I leave the Node Wrangler add-on enabled. So if you don't have that enabled, it comes with Blender by default, but the Node Wrangler add-on, you can just search for it, add it. And what that's going to allow us to do is now on this gradient texture, press Control T, and that will create these texture coordinate nodes, which gives us some control over the mapping and of course how that texture is being interpreted. So that I think the generated input works fine here. But let's Shift Control left click on that gradient texture so that we can preview exactly what it's doing. So it's going from black to white and it's going the wrong direction now. And again, that Shift Control click is with the Node Wrangler add-on turned on. So it is giving us a gradient, but I want it to be kind of going up and down. So I'm just going to rotate this Y value, and that's one reason we want this mapping node, so that it is going from the bottom to the top, whichever way really, because what we're going to do now is add in a color ramp, pop that in there, and then let's put this all back together. And so now what we're seeing is the same as before because it was going from black to white, but now I can kind of control exactly what that looks like, but more importantly, I can control the colors here. So I want to kind of bring back that original color I had. So let's just disconnect that for a second. Control C to copy that color. And then in the white field here, I'll paste it back. And then let's put this all back together. So now it's going from black to that color I just had, but I want it to go sort of to a similar color. So let's actually just paste that in there. And then let's change it a little bit so that maybe it is a little bit darker at the bottom, which I'm not sure what actually would be realistic. Would it be darker at the bottom? I'm just going for looks here. But maybe in that gets a little more saturation, and maybe that's like more of like a red value or something. So now we kind of have this cool gradient. Now, if you didn't want to get into continuously adjusting those colors twice because there's two inputs there, you could add in a hue saturation and you could quickly play around with some different color options. So that's a nice tool. And you can also use this to, of course, control the value to make them more bright or less bright, whatever you're going for. I want to give you all the tools, but play around with it as you will. I think that that is going to be pretty good for me for now. I'm sure I'll want to adjust it more later, but liking the way that looks. Now we're getting a weird, like, you can kind of see the light through the lens there. If you want to get rid of that, you can turn on this multiple importance option. That would hide that, but I'm just gonna leave it on for now. Just wanting to point some things out to you. So those lenses are looking pretty snappy, very, very Vegas, very cool. I've been trying to think of a name for these glasses. They're like the Casino 9000s or something, I don't know. I'll think of a name at some point, or maybe we'll just stick with Casino 9000. Let's go ahead and set up the metal material because I think that's going to be pretty easy. First of all, we're going to turn this metallic value all the way up to 1. When you are working with metal materials, you usually want that to be either 1 or 0. Of course, I was just showing you on the lenses how, it could be fun to use a value somewhere in between, but I'm going to turn it all the way up to 1, and then I'm going to pick kind of a nice gold color here. Now, gold tends to have almost a little bit of a green tinge to it. It's kind of like leaning more towards green than red, I think. But I'm going to adjust the value to bring it down a little bit. It's all preference here, but something like that, and then maybe not nearly as saturated. Now I will turn the roughness down so it's nice and shiny, and you can't really see it very well because there's not a lot happening. It's very flat right now. There's not much dimension there. We do have the bevel here, so you can kind of see that, but I want to give it just a little bit of texture, and I'm going to do that with a noise texture. So I'm going to do Shift A and add a texture and have that be a noise texture. And we're going to use this to influence the roughness, just so that instead of this being, one flat roughness value, we can add, what might look like fingerprints or something. And you could add in an actual texture to do that, but I'm just going to use a noise texture to do it procedurally. So with that selected, Control T, it's going to add in those nodes like we did before. And then I want to have this go through the object input, which usually works quite nicely for procedural textures. So let's Shift Control click on that to see what we've got. It is working, but the scale is far too small right now. So I'm going to turn that up until I can start to see it. So I want it to be, pretty big. I just, I want to get some variation in there. So that is looking good. So if we put that all together, now we would see that texture on there. And basically what that's doing is now, so this is putting out values between 0 and 1, which would be, of course, 0 roughness is very shiny, 1 roughness is very not shiny, very rough. So if we plug this in here, we don't want those values going fully from 0 to 1. Of course, we don't want anything fully rough, but we probably don't want anything totally shiny either. So I could add in a couple of things here. One thing I could do would be a map range, but I like to use the converter color ramp again, just because it's a little bit more visual. So again, I don't want anything to be totally white, totally rough. So I'm going to bring this value down a little bit, maybe to like a 0.2. And then this value, maybe we'll just bring it a hair above perfect black so that we've got that. Now, if you wanted to add in some more contrast, let's see if we can find a good place to view our texture here. Now, if we bring these values closer together, it's going to kind of crush them together. You can see it better here in the preview. And that'll just kind of, we're basically adding in contrast to this. So let's see how that looks in a couple different places. Now for this noise texture, you might want to add in a little bit of distortion. Again, this is all very personal preference, but just little details like this. Speaking of detail, you can add some more detail. Little things like this can kind of make it, just be a little bit more unique, especially if you get in for some real close renders. Let's put this all back together and see what we've got. Okay, so yeah, just a little bit of texture on there. Again, not going to be crazy visible, but just something nice to have, just to give it a little bit of depth. And maybe we don't want that to be quite so contrasted, so we could either pull them apart or make these values a little bit more closer together. So I think something like that looks pretty good. Now let's see, did we have a bevel modifier on this? It looks like we did, but maybe we could add in another segment so that that's just a little bit more visible, or maybe we make it a slight bit larger. I guess we can't go too large because it's going to start pinching down there on the end. But let's add in maybe one more segment just to round that out. I think that looks pretty cool. Again, very subtle texture, but looking nice. So we're going to call it at that for the metal material, and let's move on to the most exciting material, which is going to be this horn color material. I think that's what it's called. I think at one point that was, they're probably actually made from horn, but now they're definitely not. It's made from acetate, I believe, plastic. And by the way, thank you everyone who was giving me feedback on Instagram. If you're following me there on the different things you wanted me to do and didn't want me to do, and trust me, I took your ideas into consideration. Control T there to add in a texture. We're going to use a noise texture here too. But someone on Instagram, I will put their name on the screen, was messaging me about a supplier of some of these acetates that are used in the eyewear industry. Had some really good examples of what all those were. So thank you for that. So of course it looks pink now because it's an image texture, which is what the Node Wrangler add-on automatically enabled. And when an image is missing, it will render it as pink so that you can see that it's not working properly. Wouldn't work so great if your whole scene was pink. You'd think it was working just fine. But I'm going to switch this with Shift S. That may also be a Node Wrangler hotkey, but switch that to a texture. We'll use a noise texture here as well. And then similarly, we're going to add in a color ramp. And you know what? Just to save ourselves some time, I'm going to Control C and copy the color ramp from over here in the lens material and just pop that in there. And then let's see how we're looking. So we're going to use the object input here as well. And then let's take a look at it like this. And then I'm just going to pop this up super high until we've got sort of the detail we're looking for. Something like that might work. Now I think I want these to be pretty close together so that you can really see it. And that is working nicely. Of course, we do though now want to make this transparent so you can see through it. And boom, just like that, we're pretty much all the way there. You can adjust the roughness value to be more or less rough. Of course, you can do whatever the heck you want. It's Blender. You can literally make anything. Not to get off on a dreamy tangent, but the world is your oyster. Something like that. So I want to keep that kind of shiny, maybe like a 0.15, something like that. Oh, and you know what? I forgot to take John's advice. The index of refraction, he said, would be between a 1.5 and a 1.7 or something. We'll call it 1.6. Nice there in the middle. But yeah, we've got the transparent here. Now we can see that nice detail going through. We can see that beautiful hinge that would never work in real life. And yeah, everything is pretty well together there. Of course, with the noise texture on the horn, you can, you can move. There's like sliders and stuff everywhere. Mess with the sliders. But you might want to add some detail here. You might not want to. You might want to add some distortion. That's looking kind of nice. Again, going for sort of a classic look here, but do whatever you want. Now, same thing with the lenses. You want the materials to be the colors to be relatively bright here so that it remains pretty transparent. You can see if we added in a color hue saturation and dropped this, it would get dark very fast. But I'm liking that a little bit. And again, the hue saturation is great to have in there just for quick adjustments so that you don't have to go in and like change the value on each of these, for example. But play with this as much as you like and get it looking good based on your vision, your design intent. I'm really excited to see the glasses that everyone comes up with based on this tutorial, but I'm thinking that looks pretty good for now for me. So I do actually want to do one last thing. You can probably guess what it is, but it's going to be adding in a good old Dirk logo right here onto the side. Of course, I had to leave a little space. You knew what was going there. So we're going to slap a Dirk.com on there because that's what we do here at Derek Elliott from Dirk.com tutorials. So I want to show you how you could do something like that. I'm going to do it right into this horn material. So I want to add in another texture. So let's make that a image texture. And then I'll navigate to where I have my Dirk logo saved. Oh, there's a nice picture of me that needs to be updated. Definitely, according to my mom, she thinks that is just the worst picture, but she loves me, trust me. I'm going to add in my sticker image there, and I'm going to use that to drive a few different inputs here. But before I do that, I want to go ahead and make sure that I can get things mapped nicely. So I'm going to add in in my viewport display options, I can change this to texture, so we will see any textures that are present. Now you'll only see these usually if it's selected. So you can see if I select a noise texture, it's not going to show it. But clicking that there will show that the texture is existing here. Now, some of these objects are not UV unwrapped, but some of them are. These are probably left over from that initial plane or something, but I don't want them anywhere on this object, so I'm going to pull out just a little window here, and let's make this a UV image editor, and let's bring in our sticker sheet that we use all the time. I'm going to go tab into edit mode, A to select everything, U to smart UV project, I guess, and then just scale this all down into a white area so that it's not getting any of the texture. But I want to add it in, of course, right here. So before I do that, I'm going to actually need to recreate my trash collection. Oh, I still have my trash collection. So I'm going to Shift D to duplicate this and move that into the trash collection, because what I want to do now is apply my mirror modifier so that it doesn't say cred, mock.cred on the other side. So I'm going to tap into edit mode, and let's see if I can make this work. Sometimes UV unwrapping with Subdivision does not work very well. So I'm going to select, I guess I should select, let's get this one and this one. Let's just do this for now. So U, and then I'm going to do project from view, and then we're going to move this up here, and that's just fabulous. Of course it doesn't work. So because this has a subdivision surface on it, it's adding in, like, it's trying to, it just doesn't work. I hate it. Let's try unwrap, and then there's this option for use subdivision surface, which needs to be the first modifier for the unwrap, which it's not, and it can't currently be. So I could apply these modifiers and then just do that, and that should work fine. I think another thing though that I could maybe do is add in one more segment to this object so that there's just less stretching going on. So let's try that one more time. U, project from view, and that's looking much nicer. Maybe a little bit of stretching going on, but I'm not too worried about it. Again, the best thing to do would be to apply all the modifiers if you really wanted to get accurate UVs at this stage. But I think for me, we're going to try to keep it simple. We did some UV unwrapping in the shoe tutorial as well, so if you haven't seen that, check it out. But with that in place, let's go around to the other side, and U, project from view. U, project from view. That's always going to be a beautiful rhyme here at Dirk Tutorials. You know what? That is stretching, but I'm just going to love it and live with it. I guess we could add in an edge loop. That would get rid of it. Again, not worried about it. I like it. I dig it. Why is it not stretched on the other side, though? Oh, I guess it is. It's kind of cool. We'll leave it. It's Dirky. Maybe in my final renders I'll adjust it, but for now I like it. So I want to use this to control, like I said, a few things. So for one, I do want it to control the color. So we've got the horn material obviously going in here, and then I want to have another color. So let's do a mix RGB. So the first color is the horn, and then the second color is going to be a gold color. So let's actually just copy our gold color from over here in the metal material, and then let's put that right here. And then we're going to use this sticker sheet object texture to control the factor. So control the mixing basically. And with the mix shader, 0 is going to be fully the first input, and 1 is going to be fully the second input. So the white areas correspond to a value of 1. So I actually want this to go in here, and I want this to go into the factor. And now I need to paste this color back over here. Now I'm getting a little confused. Guess and check. Okay. It appears to have worked. We can see it there, but it is transparent. So you could have this control the transparent value, which I think would work fine. Let's just try plugging that in. Yeah, so that does work. You could also, and I want it to be kind of like a metallic look anyway, so I could just plug it into the metallic value, but I want it to be the other way around. So let's do an invert. And metallic materials, fun tip, cannot be transparent. So that kind of gets the job done for us. So we'll just leave it at that. Now roughness, I think we can just leave it the same roughness. That's probably going to be just fine. But we do want to maybe add in just a little bit of bump. So I'm sorry, I should be zooming in here for you so you can see what we're doing. I'm going to add in a vector bump, and then I'm going to plug this into the normal input, and then this will go into the height input. So now we have just a little bit of a bump. Now you probably want to turn this distance pretty far down. You could control the strength a little bit too, just to make it pretty subtle. But what we have there is just kind of a very subtle little emboss, deboss, however you want to call it, detail. Make it strong, make it not strong. Not super visible, but kind of a nice little detail. And we had to get the Dirk.com in there, so happy we've got it. It's on both sides. Now, if you wanted to add some texture anywhere else, you could, of course, unwrap little areas on the rest of your model, but I think as far as materials go, I'm going to leave it just like that. So what I want to do now is move into a short section where we will set up sort of a basic white backdrop render. And then I keep saying if we have time for animation, but boy, is this getting to be a long tutorial and I want to get it out soon. So we'll see what we can do, but join me in the next part. And if you're leaving us here, then feel free to share with me on Instagram, like and subscribe, send me your sunglasses. I would love to see what you're coming up with. And of course, if you're watching this video around the time it comes out, hopefully you'll submit to Render Weekly and we'll get to see a lot of cool sunglasses from a lot of cool people. So let's go ahead and move on to the next part. Thank you so much for being here. So carrying on exactly where we left off, I want to go ahead and actually make a render, something that you could print out and give to your mother so that she could hang on the fridge, or to your friends or family or other folks, so that, yeah, you got something to show off. So let's go ahead and make an actual render that you can share with the world. So what I want to do is, first of all, move my head out of the way, and I can't select it because I purposefully made it unselectable. I'm going to move that to my trash collection. Of course, if we need it back, it will be there. Don't throw heads away in real life. Keep them right where they are. But I want to get my viewport working a little bit better for me. Let's just go ahead and kind of start fresh here. So I think I want a large window over here to do my modeling, my setup of the lighting scene. Over here I'll leave as a rendered view, and then over here I will make this a shader editor just in case we do need to mess with the shaders anymore. But yeah, we're looking at our nice little pair of glasses here floating in space. So what I want to do is make them not floating in space. The way I'm going to do that is by pressing Shift A and adding a plane, and then let's just scale that up quite a bit so we've got a nice little ground there. And then let's move our glasses up onto it. Now I'm just selecting the frame object here because everything else was parented to it. That's something that we did in the modeling section, if you recall. So I'm just going to very carefully move this up until that is sitting nicely on my ground plane there. So that's looking good. I think I want to go with a pretty natural light here. So I'm going to actually get rid of all these lamps. Well, let's move them to the trash collection just in case we want them back. But let's set up a camera so that we can actually, you can't render anything without a camera. So you can see if I press F12 there, it's going to say, hey, there's no camera. So let's add a camera. Shift A, camera, Alt R to reset the rotation, and then GY, let's bring it back. RX90, so it's looking straight ahead. So now we can press 0 on our number pad in this view, and we'll look through the camera. Now you can't see the plane because it's exactly lined with it and it's 0 thickness, but there it is. It is real. It is in our render. But the reason I brought my camera out here is because what I want to do now is add an empty. I'll make that a cube. right click, adjust the empty size, bring that down to something like that. Make sure my screencast keys are still on so you can see them. And then I'm going to parent the camera to that empty. And the reason I do that is because now what I can do is over here, I can just adjust this and I know my glasses will stay nice and centered. Now they are not quite centered right now because, let's see, do I want to move the empty back or do I want to move the lenses forward? I think I'm going to move this forward a little bit just so that it's a little bit closer to center. So yeah, now we have our world set up with just that nice sun lighting, but we might want to make a few adjustments to that. First of all, let's bring the strength down quite a bit, give it a nice moody look. The sun intensity I think we can leave pretty high, but maybe we turn the size of the sun down. That will sharpen our shadows, as you can see there. Also, one thing I'll do is press Control B to create a render border over here so that we're not rendering what's outside the frame. So this is looking okay. Now, one thing I do want to do is adjust the focal length of this camera so that we've got a little bit less perspective. You can see the lower this value is, the more perspective we'll have. The higher it is, the less we'll have until we get close to orthographic, which of course you could render in orthographic if you wanted. Sort of a cool stylized thing, but not realistic. And you know how I like to emphasize that realism is not always the most important thing, but I digress. So I'm going to make that something like a 120, and then I'm going to pull this camera back. And this is one of the reasons why I use the empty like that to control it. So because now I just have to change this one Y value, and I know that's going to pull out on that axis rather than having to adjust multiple values. So I think that that is looking pretty good. Now maybe what I'll do in my world tab here is just change the rotation, try to get sort of an interesting angle. Sometimes you can use the shadows to kind of really show the shape in areas where it's not so visible with the object itself. And maybe we can pull the elevation up so those shadows aren't quite so long. So yeah, something like that I think is looking pretty good. Now maybe we do want to bring the sun intensity down a tad. Actually, with it high, I think we're getting some nice color coming through those lenses, which is something that I do like. Now, the caustics here, I will admit, are not very realistic. Blender is getting more realistic caustics in later, newer versions. I think it's something that is available now with the alpha versions, but I tried to download one of them, and the caustics options weren't in there, and I didn't want to spend too much time messing with it, so we're not going to do it for now, but caustics coming soon. I will definitely have a tutorial where we're using those once they're into the main build of Blender. But what I'm doing here in the main properties tab is I'm going to change this look from none to very high contrast, and that'll just, it'll add some contrast. Now, of course, that's something you could do in the compositor or in some other post-processing software, but I like to render a lot of times just straight to the high contrast because I just decided that there's no point in not adding it because I always add it after the fact anyways. So yeah, we're gonna add it. Now, not loving this shadow here. Maybe we need to turn the strength down even more. Just trying to get kind of a moody look here. I think something like that looks pretty good. Yeah, let's leave it at that. I think that looks nice. Now, just to maybe add a little bit more interest to this image, we could add in some more shadows from something like a plant. What would be trendy? Maybe a Monstera plant, would you say? I'm going to append a model that I just found for free on Blend Swap, so you can download the same one if you want. I have not imported this model before. Oh gosh, this is the first time I'm actually looking at it. It's coming with a lot of stuff. Should I import everything? I guess I'll just import everything. And then quickly before Blender crashes. Oh yeah, that came with a lot of stuff. Okay, so good learning lesson here though. I'm gonna move everything that came into plant collection. Okay, so in the plant collection, let's select all these objects and then move them over so they are the heck out of the way. And then we are gonna start deleting things. Good job to this person for including the lighting setup. That is very nice of them to do that, but I don't want it. I'm just going to be making some shadows. Let's see what this material actually looks like. Oh yeah, it's actually kind of nice. It's kind of realistic. Got some good detail to it. But I think I'm just gonna get rid of all that because it's just what I do. Why are there two? There's two. There's two everything. Let's select this hierarchy. Is one of them low poly or something? Sometimes models will come with multiple versions. Target. What's the target? I don't know. I'm gonna delete it. X. The plant stick. Delete it. X. Pot. Not gonna see it. But I will keep this nice empty. Now I think because I'm quite convinced that the subsurface scattering I'm seeing on here I think would slow us down a little bit. So maybe let's just remove that. So I'm going to select all these objects here. And am I missing one? Why didn't that get selected? Okay, I think we have them all there. I'm going to delete that material and I'm just going to call it blank. And we'll make it sort of a green color, but I just don't want it to have all those details. So with that one still selected, we can press Control L and link materials. So now they all just have a basic flat material, which should render quite a bit faster. Is that the texture on there? Oh, you know what? They probably have multiple. Oh boy. Okay, let's, do these have modifiers on them? They don't. So I tried to copy the material, but there were multiple material slots. So I'm going to press Control J to join them all together. Oh, and there must have been a subdivision surface on there. So let's join them all to this one, which has the subsurf. Control J. Take a look at that, and then maybe we bring this down so it's not quite so heavy. Again, these are all the same object now. And I'm going to remove the Stilt 1 material, which is what that was called. So now, you know, if we do get just a little hair of lighting reflecting into our scene, it will be green. So I want to move this back over. Oh God, what happened? Oh, the empty. That's right. Okay, let's move this back over and let's go back into our camera view. And now we finally, sorry for the little sideshow there. Let's move our origin. So one way you can do it is to go into edit mode and just move everything up to where the existing origin is. Or you could, this is way too slow. Props to the model maker, but that's just not what I need right now. I need low poly. I want shadows. What's this gonna look like if we just turn off the subdivision? I think that'll work. I think it'll work. I'm just gonna get rid of the subdivision, just so everything's a little bit faster. So yeah, all we wanted was just some shadows. Now, this appears to be pretty realistically scaled according to our glasses, but I might want to scale it down a little bit. We're just going for shadows here. I guess we better leave it realistic. Yeah, this is a really very trendy, almost jokingly so, thing to do. But you know, some nice Monstera shadows. Who doesn't love that? Maybe we can zoom out a little here while we're doing this. And you know, it's okay to rotate them at a weird angle so that you get the look you want. Oh man, my origin is not where I want it though. Let's do it this way. So now I can just move my origin. Just make sure that you uncheck this when you're done, otherwise you will have no idea why nothing is working in the near future. Yeah, I think that is doing it for me. I think that's feeling pretty good. So we've just got, you know, it's just compositionally, it's a little bit more interesting now. These leaves are a little too fat for me. Maybe I should have gone for something more grassy, but that wouldn't be as trendy as the Monstera. You know, maybe the stems? Is it the stems is too much for me? Let's select some of these stems here. Let's go into proportional editing, and let's just pull these down so they're a little bit out of the way. Very nice. Is that going to do what I wanted it to do, or is that just a pointless thing? Where's our shadow even coming from? All right, we got the sun over there. For some reason, we've got double vertices in here, so let's merge vertices by distance. Or maybe we don't. What the heck is that all about? Right-click, merge vertices by distance. Maybe we need to turn it up a little bit. There we go. Turning that up a tad is going to get rid of those. Maybe our scale is off here. Oh yeah, look at our scale. Apply the scale. Okay. So let's see if that fixes any problems. Maybe decimate it a little bit. Nah, we don't need to do that. Let's maybe add back in our subdivision surface so now. And we can crank that back down to 1. Okay, so yeah, you just watch me mess with that forever. And I'm going to keep messing with it until I get the shadow look I like. Oh, the whole reason I did that was I wanted to go in and make it so these were all facing one way. Oh no, that's not going to work now. I'm going to add in another plant, I think. So let's Shift D to duplicate, or let's do Alt D to duplicate it. And then let's rotate it around at just kind of a different angle. And then let's move both these together. Just so we've got a little more shadows to play with. And you know what? Maybe on this material we even add in a little bit of opacity, alpha, or transmission. Ooh, the transmission is kind of cool. That's giving us a little bit of a nice look, but I don't like it. So with what I'm doing here, I want to be able to still see my glasses, of course, but just add a little bit of interest to the image. Okay, I think I'm going to stop messing with it, leave it at that. As far as rendering settings go, you would just want to, I think by default, denoise is on now, which of course that's going to remove noise. You can display it in the viewport as well if you want. But the default settings honestly all work really well here. So I wouldn't change too much. But just to go ahead and render it out, you would just press F12. So let's go ahead and do that. And depending on how powerful your computer is, which since people always ask, I have two 2080 Ti's in this computer now, but hoping to get some of those new 4000 cards when they come out. But yeah, just rendering this out, seeing how it looks. We've got our nice shadows in there. Again, you know, you don't have to do that. It is super trendy. And honestly, if you put Monstera shadows in your render, somebody will probably call you out. But it honestly, it does look nice because just sitting on a plain plane isn't the hottest thing in the world. So I'm going to go ahead and save this image to my renders folder. And we will name this R5, which I will change to a JPEG because for some reason, even though memory is so cheap, I don't like to take up too much space. So we got that saved. But yeah, it just looks kind of nice. So, you know, here would be the render without the shadows, and then here's it with them. Just a little bit of a nice thing. I think it is a good touch, you know, whether or not you use Monsteras or something else. Shadows can be a really good way to just increase the compositional value of your render. And with something as easy to work with as this sky texture, you know, why not mess around a little bit? There's a cool animation for you right there. You could just animate the sun rotation. And a day in Monstera land has passed. But anyways, I'm going to leave the rendering portion at that. And if there's a next part, I'll see you there. Otherwise, thanks for being here, and like and subscribe. Share your renders with me wherever you like to share them. I'm on LinkedIn a lot, by the way. Tag me on LinkedIn if you're posting things there. But of course, Instagram, Twitter, not so much Facebook. But yeah, I would love to see what you're working on. So feel free to share it with me. And yeah, thanks for being here. All right. So we're in this deep. We might as well go all the way and put together a quick little animation. I've got a pretty simple idea that, you know, hopefully leaves you with just the last little final touches to make things a little bit exciting. So let's first decide how long we want the animation to be, and let's make it pretty short. I'm thinking 6 seconds. So let's do 6 times 30 because I like to work in 30 frames per second, which we're going to want to change that over here to 30 frames per second. And if you press spacebar to play, nothing should be happening because nothing has any keyframes yet. So what do we want to keyframe? I think the first thing I'll keyframe is just a little bit of rotation in the sun, just to make the shadows move a little bit. So let's, again, we need to set up our viewport. I think we're pretty well done with the materials. So let's, so let's just set up our viewport like this. So I'm going to have this be a rendered view, or I guess we'll have 2 views. So I like to have, when I'm doing animation, I like to have a graph editor up here. So let's change this to a graph editor right there. And then I'll have this be my rendered view with no overlays. And I'll have this be another view, probably also looking through the camera though. Something like that. Okay, so sun rotation. We want it, we set this render up to look pretty good, so we don't want to change it too much. So what I might do is just change the rotation very slightly, but let's see which way do we want to go. I think maybe we'll have it start a little bit over that way. So let's insert a keyframe here on frame 1, and then on frame 180, let's just drag that a very slight amount, insert another keyframe, and then I want to change the interpolation on this to linear. And by the way, I have a hotkey for frame selected. You'll see me doing that a ton in the graph editor. I also do it in the viewport here. I think the hotkey is period, but frame selected, that works everywhere, and I use it in the graph editor as well. So I changed that to linear just so that our sun moves at a constant rate there. I think that's nice, pretty subtle, but we should notice it. It's just adding little details like this will help improve the animation. Now, of course, you could just render it out like that if that's all you're going for, but maybe we have these glasses sort of settle down into place. So maybe just for the final second, they're in their resting state. So we want to insert keyframes. Let's just go ahead and insert keyframes for all the rotation value. And then for location, let's have it just go up and down. So I'm just going to insert a single keyframe on the Z location right where it is right now. So, and is that poking through? No, it's not poking through. It looks like it's in the right place because I made it in the right place earlier. I don't know why I didn't trust myself. You should always trust yourself. So I want to have this start up maybe a little bit higher. So just something like that. We want to go pretty slow here. I mean, not too high because there's only 6 seconds. So let's just insert that keyframe. And for that one, and here's another thing we like to do in the graph editor, is turn on this normalize option. So the reason you do that is that, if you're animating rotation, then that's on a scale of like 1 to 360. But this location is on a scale of like 1 to 3. So it appears way smaller in the graph editor. So normalize will basically just take everything and convert it to 0 to 1. I feel like that should probably be on by default because the graph editor is basically unusable if you don't have that on, in my opinion. So we can leave the Bezier on for that, but I think I want to change it a little bit. So I do like that, how it kind of slowly settles down there, but I want to look like it was coming in at sort of a higher speed. So I'm going to change this curve right there so that it kind of comes in sort of quick and settles down. So maybe something like this. Now I still owe everyone a little bit more of an advanced tutorial in the graph editor, but this is going to be a basic introduction to it. So that's kind of a nice just settle down animation. Now I did also insert the rotation keyframes because I want to give this just a little bit of an odd rotation. So let's maybe just have it start like that. Oh yeah, so you can see that that Dirk.com. Schnazzy. Now we don't want to give this too much rotation. Maybe just like that. That's probably good. And I'm pressing R twice to just enter my trackball rotation. That's the what that's called, I believe. So I can just press I over here, and that should insert keyframes. Now those by default are all going to be Bezier interpolation, which I think is going to look fine. So let's just see what that looks like now. I think it looks pretty slick. Let's just watch it in the solid view there. So sometimes with rotation, where did I stop, or where did I insert the rotation? Okay, so I put it right there. Now sometimes it might be good to pull your rotation keyframes back just a little bit. So like let's select all these and then deselect this side. And then let's move these back a little bit. Gosh. Okay, let's just hide the location one for now so that we can just move all these back. Is that going to move my... No, that's not moving the location because it's unchecked. which I think makes it so it's not visible. Okay, so that is the one problem with normalize, is a lot of things will end up overlapping, especially if you're using default interpolation. So what I was going to say is I want to move the rotation keyframes back just a little bit so that before it hits the ground, it's actually in its proper rotation, and that'll avoid any potential intersection there. Oh, and I guess that disables it. Huh, okay, so it's coming back. So let's see, how does that look? Now maybe we actually do the same thing here where we have that sort of ease in. And if you don't want to edit those manually, you can just actually do a default interpolation here. You can do really any of these. I know I've messed with this one before. That's kind of silly. But I'm going to use the, really any of these. Quartic will work fine. Now it's going the wrong way now, so I'm going to press Control E and have it ease out. So now we'll kind of automatically get a nice curve where it sort of slowly settles into place. And I think that that looks pretty nice. Now maybe the last thing we do is just have the camera follow that down a very little bit. So let's just give the camera, we're going to animate it here. You could parent it to this, but then it's going to get the rotation and stuff. You'd have to add constraints. We don't want to do that. We'll do that some other time. So insert a single keyframe on the Z location of our empty, which is controlling our camera at frame 180. And then maybe we have it sort of, should we have it? Yeah, we'll just have it move very slightly so it sort of follows it down. Oh, but then we're starting to see our little Monstera over there. Which, oh man, I don't want to mess with my darn shadows anymore. Uh-oh, we got problems. Let's, I guess why the heck not? Let's just put that there. And let's see if we can get that little plant out of the way so it's not messing up our nice ethereal look. Okay, so that is officially out of the way, I think. Now when you're doing animation, you do kind of always have to check your surroundings to make sure nothing's clipping into the frame that wasn't originally. Now for the camera, let's give that probably the same interpolation. So let's do, did we do Quartic? I guess we did. Ease out. And now we just kind of have this really nice, really simple settling down animation. You know, this would be a good shot that would kind of work within some other shots. You know, that alone maybe isn't a ton, but you get the idea, you know. You do the same thing, you add the keyframes. Oh man, I think I messed up my shadows. I did mess my shadows up. Gosh, just gotta get that out of view. Let's do our proportional editing. Let's see if we can't just move that back a tad. We're just moving it on that one too, because they're linked. We just create all sorts of problems here. Okay, that's looking better. But you get the point. You could go in and adjust things as much as you wanted, but there's a pretty basic animation for you. Sort of just settling down. Now you could control it a little bit more so that like one edge hits the surface and then it kind of settles, but not as much as I want to explain in this video, which has already gone on for far too long, but I hope you all are enjoying it. Now to actually render this out, I would always recommend rendering it to frames. So you would select an output folder where the frames would go to, and then I would usually just change this to JPEG. Of course, that gets into quality discussions and file sizes, but if I don't have transparent stuff, honestly, I usually do just render to a JPEG. I realize it's not the highest quality, but hey, who cares? Well, some people care, but I like small files like JPEGs. That Polyfjord video with the EXR, man, that was too much for me. I was like, I need my, I think I even commented on it. It's like, I need small file size JPEGs. But anyways, so in this video, we designed glasses. We talked about designing glasses. We modeled glasses. We did materials on glasses. We lit glasses. We rendered glasses. And now we have animated glasses. And I think that's about all the glasses I want to deal with for now. So hope you all have enjoyed this. Yeah, like I said, render it out to frames, string it together either in the Blender video sequence editor. There are plenty of videos online on how to do that, or do it in another software like After Effects is what I would usually use for something like that. But I guess I'll go ahead and render this out so that we can have a nice preview of it in the tutorial. But I'm going to get on to editing the rest of this and hopefully get this video published ASAP. Of course, if you're watching it, it has been published. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Like and subscribe, do all that good stuff, leave comments below, share your results with me. And yeah, thanks so much for being here.